The clatter of the obsidian briefcase hitting the pristine white linen of the table was a gunshot in the symphony of quiet opulence that was Ethelgard. It wasn't just a case, it was a declaration of war. Inside, visible through the unlatched lid, were stacks of $100 bills, bundled and sterile. $500,000. Damien Vance, the boy king of the cryptocurrency world, a man whose net worth fluctuated more wildly than a seismograph during an earthquake, but was always astronomical, fixed his gaze on the waitress. His eyes, the color of a frozen lake, held a particular kind of modern cruelty, the kind born not of hardship, but of unchecked, instantaneous success. He smirked, a twitch of his lips that didn't reach his eyes. "It's a simple proposition, sweetheart," he drawled, his voice loud enough to curdle the hollandaise on the neighboring tables. "You're a ghost, a background character. I'm the main event. I'm closing a massive deal with a consortium in Riyadh. They're old school. They value tradition. So, entertain my partners, explain the consensus mechanism of a proof-of-stake blockchain, do it in fluent formal Arabic. Right now. If you succeed, this is a tip." He gestured to the cash. "If you fail, you're not just fired. I'll buy this restaurant and have it demolished." The air in Ethelgard solidified. The billionaires at his table, a pack of sycophants who orbited his gravitational pull of wealth, chuckled with the practiced ease of men who had never been told no. They expected her to stammer, to blush, to flee in a torrent of tears. But Elena Petrova didn't flinch. She was 29, but the exhaustion etched around her eyes made her look older. She simply took a slow, deliberate breath, her gaze meeting the man who believed the digital world had made him a god. And then she opened her mouth. What emerged was not just a language, it was a meticulously crafted key, one that would unlock the prison of her current life and simultaneously lock the door on his entire fraudulent empire. The blood didn't just drain from Damien Vance's face, it evaporated, leaving behind a mask of pure, unadulterated terror. This is the story of how a titan of the new world was dismantled by a forgotten relic of the old. The Tuesday evening air over Manhattan was thick and humid, a suffocating blanket that promised a storm. Inside Ethelgard, the air was different, chilled to a precise 68 degrees and smelling of seared scallops, vintage Bordeaux, and the kind of inherited wealth that considered new money a vulgarity. Elena watched a bead of condensation trace a path down a crystal water glass. Outside, she knew her 10-year-old Toyota Corolla, the one with the perpetually rattling exhaust, was collecting a parking ticket that would cost her a full day's wages. She subtly shifted her weight, a silent groan escaping her as her feet, swollen inside their sensible black shoes, protested. It was the 14th hour of her double shift, a favor for a co-worker who had a family emergency, which everyone knew was code for a concert at Madison Square Garden. But Eleanor never complained. Complaining was a privilege for those with options. To the staff and patrons of Ethelgard, she was just Eleanor, the quiet one, efficient, invisible, and utterly forgettable. She was the waitress who could remember a 12-person order without a notepad, who never spilled a drop, and whose personal life was a complete and total void. They knew she had a son, Leo, because she'd once had to leave mid-shift when the school nurse called about his asthma attack. They didn't know about the medical debt that had become a ravenous beast, devouring every paycheck before it even hit her account. They didn't know that Leo's condition required an experimental treatment, a long shot with a price tag that might as well have been a flight to Mars. And they certainly, absolutely, didn't know that before the apron and the serving tray, Elena Petrova had been a senior forensic accountant for the U.S. Treasury Department, specializing in dismantling international money laundering schemes that used cryptocurrency. "Elena, Table 7 needs their check, and stop daydreaming." The voice belonged to Gregory, the floor manager, a man whose ambition had calcified into a bitter resentment for everyone he managed. He wore his authority like a cheap suit, 2 sizes too small. "On it, Gregory," she replied, her voice a placid lake. "And for God's sake, smile," he hissed as she passed. "We have Damien Vance's party in the rotunda. I don't want your funeral face scaring away $1 million tip." Eleanor forced the corners of her mouth upwards. It felt unnatural, like bending a bone. She was tired, a deep, cellular exhaustion that sleep couldn't fix. In her locker, her phone held a new email from the hospital's billing department. The subject line was "Final Notice." The experimental treatment for Leo would cost $480,000, payable in advance. It was a number so large, so absurd, that it had ceased to feel real. It was a joke, and she was the punchline. She delivered the check to Table 7, a couple who had spent 3 hours complaining about the wine, the temperature of the butter, and the thread count of the napkins before leaving a 7% tip. This was her reality, serving the whims of people who had everything, while fighting for a son who had nothing but a failing set of lungs. At precisely 8:15 p.m., the restaurant's delicate ecosystem was shattered. It wasn't a loud noise, but a shift in pressure, the way the air changes before a predator enters the clearing. Gregory started sweating, dabbing his forehead with a napkin. The busboys stood straighter. "He's here," a bartender whispered. "Vance!" Elena felt a cold dread seep into her stomach. Damien Vance. You couldn't open a business journal or a tech blog without seeing his face. He was the founder of Ethel, a supposedly revolutionary blockchain platform that promised to decentralize everything from finance to voting. He was 35, worth a self-reported $20 billion, and had the moral compass of a piranha. He was famous for his publicity stunts, his brutal corporate tactics, and his utter contempt for what he called the analog world, which included service staff, regulations, and basic human decency. "Elena," Gregory barked, his face ashen. "You're taking the rotunda. Maria called in sick." Elena's blood ran cold. The rotunda was the restaurant's gladiator pit, the elevated central table where the city's most powerful and obnoxious held court. "Gregory, please, anyone else? Difficult means a big payday if you play your cards right," Gregory snapped, his eyes flicking toward her worn-out shoes. "You look like you need it. Don't argue. Table 1. She swallowed the metallic taste of humiliation. He was right. She needed a miracle, and miracles didn't happen on the patio section. She smoothed her apron, collected a set of menus, and walked toward the center of the storm. The doors of Ethelgard were pushed open by 2 men built like refrigerators, their earpieces glinting under the recessed lighting. Damien Vance strode in between them. He wasn't tall, but he occupied space with an explosive energy, a vortex of ego. He wore a ridiculously expensive silk shirt, patterned with what looked like QR codes, unbuttoned 1 button too many. He was already laughing, a loud, braying sound that scraped at the nerves. His entourage, the Ethelites, as the press called them, followed in his wake. They were young, arrogant, and dressed in the new uniform of tech wealth, designer sneakers, $1,000 hoodies, and the smug expressions of men who believed they had hacked reality itself. "Gregory, my man!" Vance bellowed, clapping the manager on the shoulder hard enough to make him stumble. "Tell me the Dom Perignon is colder than my ex-wife's heart. We just closed the Riyadh deal." "Of course, Mr. Vance. Right this way," Gregory fawned, leading them to the rotunda. The volume in the restaurant instantly tripled. They didn't speak. They broadcasted. They ordered the most expensive items on the menu by pointing, their conversation a fire hose of incomprehensible jargon about tokenomics, gas fees, and yield farming. Elena approached the table, water pitcher in hand. "Good evening, gentlemen. May I offer you still or sparkling water?" Vance didn't even look at her. He was swiping through something on a phone that looked more like a pane of glass. "Sparkling. And get me a bottle of the 78 Montrachet. And don't let me see the sommelier. They're just failed actors. You get it." The table erupted in laughter. Elena poured the water, her movements economical and precise. Her hand was rock steady, a discipline honed not in restaurants, but in high-pressure government offices, where a single misplaced decimal could mean the difference between a successful seizure and an international incident. As she placed a glass in front of him, Vance finally looked up. His gaze wasn't one of acknowledgement, but of assessment, like a scientist studying an insect. "I haven't seen you here before," he stated, not to her, but to the table at large. "I've been here for 2 years, sir," Elena said, her voice soft but clear. 2 years, Vance mused, leaning back. He picked up a heavy silver fork, balancing it on his finger. "And you're still doing this. No ambition. No drive to innovate. See, this is the problem with the legacy economy. People are content to be cogs." Elena felt a familiar, hot flush of anger creep up her neck, but her expression remained a mask of polite neutrality. "May I take your appetizer orders?" "We're celebrating," Vance declared, throwing his arms wide. "We're bringing the future to the Middle East. We're replacing their archaic, oil-based financial system with the pure, incorruptible logic of the blockchain. $400 billion in projected asset transfers. To Ethel, to Ethel," the table roared. Elena felt a jolt. The Riyadh deal. She'd read about it on a public terminal at the library last week. It was hailed as a landmark of international finance. But she had seen the cracks. The technical white paper was full of buzzwords and logical impossibilities. The promises were too grand, the timeline too aggressive. It felt less like a legitimate business deal and more like a high-tech raid. "Wait a second," Vance said, holding up a hand as Eleanor began to turn away. "You, Waitress." "What's your name?" "Eleanor, sir." "Eleanor," he repeated, tasting the name. "We're celebrating a victory of digital innovation over dusty tradition. Tell me, Eleanor, what do you know about blockchain?" It was a test, a game. She recognized the pattern immediately. He didn't want an answer. He wanted a performance of ignorance so he could feel superior. "I know it's a very complex and growing field, sir," she said, choosing the safest possible answer. Vance laughed, that grating artificial sound again. "Complex? That's what people who don't get it say. It's simple, Eleanor. It's freedom. It's the end of banks, governments and, well, people like you." He turned to his friend, a man with a vacant expression, named Josh. "Remember that old banker in Zurich? The one who kept asking about our regulatory compliance? It's like trying to explain a spaceship to an ant." "Total fossil," Josh agreed, stuffing a bread roll into his mouth. He actually asked for a hard copy of the white paper. Hilarious. Vance's eyes lit up with the cruel spark of a new, terrible idea. Elena saw it form, the way a storm cloud gathers on the horizon. "Elena," he said, his voice dropping into a mock conspiratorial tone. "You look smart. You've probably overheard things here. We get all sorts, right? Wall Street guys, diplomats." "We have a diverse clientele, yes, sir," she answered, her guard up. "I'm feeling generous tonight," Vance said, reaching down and heaving the obsidian briefcase onto the table. The thud made the wine glasses tremble. He flicked open the latches. The sight of the money, so much of it, was obscene. It was a fantasy made real. "This," Vance said, is my walking around money, $500,000, for spontaneous investments. He looked directly at Eleanor, his smile a predator's grin. I'm bored, Eleanor. And my new partners from Riyadh, they're big on intellectual rigor. They believe their language, Arabic, is the language of poetry and precision. I say it's outdated. I say code is the only universal language now. He slid the briefcase to the center of the table. The mountain of cash sat there, a profane centerpiece next to the artisanal butter. $500,000, Vance announced, his voice booming through the now silent restaurant. Tax-free, it's yours, all of it, on one condition. You have to prove to me that these old-world skills have any value. I want you to explain to my friends here the core concept of Ethel's consensus mechanism, our proprietary proof of authority protocol. But you have to do it in perfect, formal, classical Arabic. The silence was absolute. Every diner had turned to watch the unfolding drama. Gregory stood frozen by the kitchen door, his face a mess of terror and greed. Go on, Vance taunted, leaning forward. Dance for me, little cog. Give it a shot. It's $500,000. Surely your pride isn't worth that much, is it? Elena stared at the money. $480,000 for Leo's treatment. The number burned behind her eyes. It was right there. A lifeline, a miracle wrapped in an insult. I don't speak Arabic, sir, she lied. It was the instinct of a hunted animal. To stay hidden was to stay safe. Vance sighed with theatrical disappointment. See? No ambition, no hidden depths, just what you see is what you get. He started to close the briefcase. But then, another voice cut through the tension. A quiet, dry voice from a nearby table. Let the young lady have a moment, Damien. All eyes turned to table 4. An older gentleman sat alone, nursing a glass of scotch. He was impeccably dressed in a classic tweed jacket that looked out of place, and yet perfectly at home. It was Arthur Pendleton, the reclusive head of a century-old investment firm, a titan of old money who rarely appeared in public. Vance, for the first time, looked momentarily flustered. Arthur, Vance said, recovering his swagger. Good to see you. Just having a bit of fun. It seems more like a vivisection, Pendleton replied calmly, his eyes on Eleanor. The terms of your wager are specific. Perhaps she's merely intimidated. Vance's ego, pricked by Pendleton's disapproval, flared. Fine, she can try. What's the harm? It's not like she can actually do it. He turned back to Eleanor, his voice dripping with condescension. The floor is yours, Eleanor. Astound us with your hidden linguistic talents. Eleanor looked at the briefcase. She looked at Damien Vance, a man whose empire was built on digital smoke and mirrors. She thought of Leo, of the sound of his wheezing breath in the middle of the night. She thought of the life she had abandoned, a life of chasing financial criminals through the labyrinthine alleyways of the dark web. A life where she wasn't just Elena, the waitress, but Elena Petrova, the woman who had single-handedly traced $1 billion crypto heist back to a server farm in North Korea. A woman who had spent 2 years on assignment in Dubai, working with financial intelligence units, becoming fluent in the precise, technical Arabic of contracts and finance. She hadn't used it in years. Not since the incident that forced her into hiding to become a ghost. But the knowledge wasn't gone. It was just dormant. Vance chuckled. Cat got your tongue? Or is the processing power just too low? Elena placed the water pitcher on a nearby serving stand. The small click echoed in the silence. She stood up straight, and the change was seismic. The weary slump of the server vanished, replaced by the rigid, confident posture of an analyst about to deliver a damning brief. She looked Damien Vance directly in the eye. The hushed restaurant held its breath. And then she began to speak. The air in Ethelgard grew thin, as if the collective gasp of 50 wealthy patrons had sucked all the oxygen from the room. Elena closed her eyes for a fleeting second, not in prayer, but in calibration. She was shedding a skin, sloughing off the meek, invisible waitress, and letting the woman she used to be emerge from the shadows. When her eyes opened, the tired, washed-out grey had been replaced by a focused, steely intensity. She did not raise her voice. She pitched it perfectly, a clear, modulated tone that cut through the silence with the effortless authority of a CEO addressing a boardroom. She began, not with the hesitant, broken Arabic of a tourist, but with the fluid, articulate cadence of a native academic. It was Fusha, classical Arabic, the language of scholars and treaties, so pure and precise that even the two silent Saudi partners at Vance's table sat bolt upright, their faces masks of astonishment. "Sayyid Vance," she started, her voice smooth as polished marble. "أنت تطلب مني أن أشرح بروتوكول إثبات السلطة الخاص بك. المفهوم في جوهره بسيط بشكل مخادع." "Mr. Vance," she began, her voice smooth as polished marble, "you ask me to explain your proof of authority protocol. The concept at its core is deceptively simple." Vance's smirk wavered, replaced by a flicker of confusion. He recognized the language, but the fluency, the sheer confidence, was utterly alien. It was like watching a stray cat suddenly compose a symphony. Elena took a step closer to the table, her presence commanding the space around her. She continued, her Arabic becoming more technical, more intricate, weaving in financial and cryptographic terms with a terrifying ease. تدعي أن شبكتك مؤمنة من خلال عقدة موثوقة من المدققين المعتمدين مسبقاً. هذا يخلق نظاماً مركزياً يتنكر في شكل لا مركزية. إنه ليس ثورياً. إنه مجرد إعادة صياغة لقاعدة بيانات خاصة ذات نقاط وصول محدودة. You claim your network is secured by a trusted consortium of pre-approved validators. This creates a centralized system masquerading as decentralization. It is not revolutionary. It is merely a rebranding of a private database with limited access points. One of Vance's tech lieutenants, a young man who had been smirking moments before, now stared at her, his mouth agape. He understood. He knew the terminology. Elena's gaze never left Vance. She was no longer a waitress. She was a prosecutor delivering her closing argument. المشكلة الحقيقية يا سيد فانس ليست في النظرية بل في التنفيذ. لقد قمت بمراجعة المعاملات العامة على سلسلة كتل إيثل. في الكتلة رقم 7-329-01 هناك معاملة بقيمة 100 مليون دولار تم التحقق منها بواسطة مدقق واحد فقط. عنوانه العام يبدأ ب 0xb7. وقد قام هذا المدقق نفسه بالتحقق من 5 معاملات أخرى ضخمة جميعها مرسلة من محافظ غير معروفة إلى محفظة واحدة مرتبطة بشركتك القابضة في جزر كايمان. The true problem, Mr. Vance, is not in the theory, but in the execution. I have reviewed the public transactions on the Ethel blockchain. In block number 73290-1, there is a transaction for $100 million that was validated by a single validator. Public address beginning 0xb7. This same validator has verified 5 other massive transactions, all originating from unknown wallets and terminating in a single wallet tied to your holding company in the Cayman Islands. The color began to drain from Damien Vance's face. Block 7329, Los West, WEP 1. The address 0xb7, these weren't public knowledge. They were the hidden gears of his machine, the secret back doors he used to inflate his company's value and launder money. Arthur Pendleton, at the neighboring table, slowly put down his scotch. He was leaning forward now, his expression one of intense, rapt fascination. Elena delivered the final, devastating blow, her voice dropping to a near whisper that was somehow louder than all the shouting that had come before. بروتوكول إثبات السلطة الخاص بك ليس آلية إجماع. إنه مسرح، والمدققون ليسوا أوصياء، إنهم دمى، وأنت لا تبيع المستقبل. أنت تدير عملية غسيل أموال متطورة بشكل لا يصدق. الصفقة السعودية ليست استثماراً، إنها المخرج الذي تحتاجه قبل أن ينهار كل شيء. Your proof of authority protocol is not a consensus mechanism. It is theater. Your validators are not guardians. They are puppets. And you are not selling the future. You are running an incredibly sophisticated money laundering operation. The Saudi deal isn't an investment. It's the exit liquidity you need before the entire thing collapses. She finished with a cold, precise finality, switching back to flawless English. In short, Mr. Vance, your company is a house of cards built on a fraudulent foundation. And you just dared the one person in this room who knows how to read the blueprints to speak up. She stopped. The silence that followed was a physical thing, a crushing weight. For a full 10 seconds, the only sound was the faint hum of the air conditioning. Damien Vance stared at her, his face a ghastly shade of white. He looked like a man who had just seen his own ghost. He understood. He didn't need a translation. He had heard the block numbers. He had heard the Cayman Islands reference. He had heard the sound of his world ending. It was one of the Saudi partners who broke the spell. He looked from Eleanor to Vance, then spoke to his colleague in hushed, urgent Arabic. She knows. She knows everything. Call the minister. Kill the wire transfer. Vance's head snapped towards them, then back to Elena. The confusion was gone, replaced by a primal, cornered animal rage. "Who are you?" he breathed, the words barely audible. "I'm the waitress, sir," Elena said, her voice returning to its calm, neutral tone. "And I believe the terms of our wager were met. I will be taking my tip now." The illusion shattered. The restaurant erupted in a cacophony of gasps and frantic whispers. Diners were pulling out their phones, their screens glowing in the dim light. Gregory, the manager, looked as though he might spontaneously combust. Vance shot to his feet, his chair screeching backward on the marble floor. "This is a setup!" he screamed, his voice cracking. "A trick! Corporate espionage! Who sent you? Was it Pendleton?" He pointed a trembling finger at the old man. Arthur Pendleton simply raised an eyebrow. "I assure you, Damien, if I wanted to ruin you, I would have done it on the stock market, not during dinner. This is entirely your own creation." Elena remained calm, a rock in the torrent of his fury. "You made a bet, Mr. Vance, in front of a room full of witnesses. The deal was simple. Explain the protocol in Arabic. Get the money." "It's a lie!" Vance shrieked, his face turning a blotchy purple. "She's a spy. Security. Get her out of here." His two bodyguards moved forward, but a sharp voice stopped them. "I wouldn't do that if I were you." Arthur Pendleton was now on his feet, his calm demeanor replaced by an icy authority. "The young lady won your bet, Damien. Pay her, or the video of you welshing on a $500,000 wager with a waitress will be the least of your problems by morning." "Pay her!" a voice shouted from across the room. "Yeah, pay up, Vance!" Another joined in. Vance was trapped. His colossal ego had built the cage, and his own words had locked the door. To refuse payment was to admit weakness, to confirm that the money, and her words, mattered. To pay was to validate her, to hand over a fortune to the woman who had just publicly executed him. He looked at Eleanor, his eyes burning with a hatred so pure it was almost beautiful. "Fine," he spat, the word tasting like poison in his mouth. He shoved the briefcase across the table. "Take it. It's pocket change. Take your blood money and disappear." Elena did not snatch the case. She walked forward calmly, her steps measured. She placed her hands on the cool obsidian surface and clicked the latches shut. The sound was as final as a gavel strike. "It's not blood money, Mr. Vance," she said, lifting the heavy case. "It's severance." She turned to the petrified manager. "Gregory," she said, her voice clear and carrying, "I quit." She gave Vance one last look. "And for the record, the Cayman Islands Holding Company, Ethel Prime Holdings, LLC. You funneled the funds through 3 shell corporations, but you made a mistake on the final transfer. You used the same digital signature you used to register the company's domain name. It took me about 4 minutes to find it on the public registrar. You should hire better accountants." Vance looked as if she had physically struck him. With that, Elena turned and walked away. The path from the rotunda to the staff exit parted before her like the Red Sea. She could feel every eye in the room on her back, a mixture of awe, fear, and disbelief. She clutched the handle of the briefcase, its weight a grounding force. Her heart was a frantic drum against her ribs. "Get out. Get out before he realizes he can't let you leave alive." She burst into the cramped locker room, her breath coming in ragged bursts. She tore off her apron and bow tie, throwing them into a laundry bin. She grabbed her worn coat and her small purse. "Elena?" It was Maria, the girl she'd covered for, who had apparently recovered from her family emergency and come to collect her things. Her eyes were wide, fixed on the briefcase. What was that? Everyone's saying you took down Damien Vance. Is that real?" "I have to go, Maria," Elena said, her voice trembling as the adrenaline began to recede, leaving a chilling void in its place. "I have to go now." "But who are you?" Maria asked, taking a step back, as if seeing her for the first time. Elena paused at the steel back door, the first fat drops of the promised storm beginning to spatter against the metal. "I'm just a mum, Maria," she whispered. "I'm just a mum." She pushed the door open and ran out into the wet, grimy alley. She didn't slow down until she reached her Corolla, fumbling with the keys, her hands shaking uncontrollably. She threw the briefcase onto the passenger seat and locked the doors. The engine coughed and sputtered, before catching with a reluctant roar. As she pulled out of the alley, tires squealing on the slick pavement, she glanced in her rearview mirror. No one was following. Not yet. A choked sob, half laughter, half terror, escaped her lips. She had the money, the full $500,000. She could save Leo. They could disappear. They could have a life. But as she drove through the rain-streaked streets of Manhattan, heading for the bridge to Queens, a cold, hard certainty settled in her gut. Damien Vance was not a man who accepted humiliation. He was a man who deleted his enemies. He wouldn't just be Aang. The storm broke the moment the Corolla's tires hit the asphalt of the alleyway, a biblical deluge that sought to wash the grime from Manhattan's bones. It was a futile effort. The city's sins were etched too deep. Elena felt a kinship with it. Her own past, she knew, could never be fully cleansed. It could only be managed. The obsidian briefcase sat on the passenger seat, an alien artifact in the shabby, familiar landscape of her car. It didn't glitter or hum with power. It was a dead weight, a dense block of potential energy. $500,000. Leo's future. Her death warrant. The two thoughts were not contradictory. They were two sides of the same debased coin Vance had just flipped. Her hands, which had been so steady while pouring $1,000 bottles of wine, now trembled so violently she could barely keep them on the wheel. The adrenaline was a fire that had consumed all her fuel, leaving behind nothing but a hollow, shaking cold. She drove without a destination, a ghost in a machine navigating a city of ghosts. The wipers fought a losing battle against the rain, their rhythmic squeak a metronome, marking the seconds of her stolen freedom. Each pair of headlights that swelled in her rearview mirror was a potential hunter. Every shadow that danced at the edge of her vision was a harbinger. She had not merely embarrassed Damien Vance. She had eviscerated him, performed a public autopsy on his life's work in the precise, sterile language of finance and code. Men like Vance did not respond to such an affront with lawyers. They responded with erasers, men who could make inconvenient people disappear. Her mind, a tool she had deliberately blunted for years, was coming back online with terrifying speed. It sifted through threats, calculated probabilities, ran scenarios. The old protocols kicked in, the muscle memory of a life spent in the shadows. Change direction randomly. Avoid major arteries with comprehensive camera coverage. Look for a cash-only motel. But every protocol led to the same dead end. Running was temporary. Hiding was a deferment. He knew her name. In the digital world, Vance commanded, a name was a key to everything. She clutched the cheap plastic of the steering wheel, a sob catching in her throat, hot and sharp. For 2 years she had been a spectre, a non-entity. She had sacrificed her name, her career, her very identity, all to build a fragile wall around her son. She had accepted the humiliation, the exhaustion, the invisibility, because it was the price of Leo's safety. And in a single, glorious, catastrophic act of defiance, she had not just torn that wall down, she had lit it on fire as a beacon for her enemies. The burner phone on the seat next to the case buzzed, a venomous electric sound. It was a sound she had not heard in years. In her old life, a buzz from an unknown number meant a threat, a dead drop, a compromised asset. She pulled over, the Corolla shuddering to a stop in the shadow of the Queensboro Bridge. The city glittered across the water, a beautiful, indifferent monster. With a shaking hand, she picked up the phone. A single text message. Block 73229 Luanorzelt 1. You're very clever, but you're also very exposed. I know where you live, Elena. I know about Leo. The words did not register as text. They were physical blows. I know where you live. The fragile sanctuary of her tiny Astoria apartment, the one place in the world that was hers, violated. I know about Leo. The air left her lungs in a single, silent scream. He had reached through the digital ether and laid a phantom hand on her son. The game was no longer about money or pride or corporate malfeasance. It had become elemental. A predator hunting her child. The fear was a physical thing, a block of ice forming in her chest. But beneath the ice, something else stirred, a deeper, colder current. It was rage, a pure, crystalline rage that burned away the terror and left behind a terrible clarity. She had spent years running from the wolves. She had forgotten that she too had teeth. She could not go home. The police were a fantasy. Vance's legal team would paint her as a hysterical, larcenous waitress in minutes, burying the truth under a mountain of motions and NDAs. Her old government contacts were less than ghosts. To contact them would be to sign her own death certificate and theirs. She was an island, and the tide was rising. But she wasn't the only player on the board. She thought of the man at table 4, Arthur Pendleton. He hadn't just watched the show, he had participated. He had nudged the scales, his quiet words acting as a fulcrum. He hadn't done it out of kindness. Men like Pendleton didn't deal in kindness. They dealt in assets, liabilities, and opportunities. Vance, in his arrogant display, had made himself a liability. And Elena, in her desperate gambit, had just demonstrated her value as an asset. It was a long shot, a prayer aimed at a god she wasn't sure existed. but it was the only shot she had. She started the car, the engines rattle a familiar comfort. She made a sharp, illegal U-turn, the tires squealing in protest. She wasn't running to Queens to hide in the shadows. She was driving back into the heart of the storm, back to Manhattan, to the den of a different kind of lion. The Upper East Side was another country. The rain here seemed cleaner, washing over the limestone facades of pre-war buildings that stood like silent, unimpeachable sentinels of generational wealth. She parked the Corolla across from a building whose quiet opulence screamed power far more loudly than Vance's garish silks. It felt like mooring a garbage scow next to a battleship. For a long moment, she simply sat, the engine idling, the briefcase a silent passenger. This was the point of no return. If Pendleton turned her away, she would have revealed herself to a second, equally powerful man for no reason. She would be utterly exposed. She took out a crumpled receipt from the glove compartment and the cheap ballpoint pen she used to take orders. She thought about what to write, the words forming in her mind with the cold precision of a legal brief. Mr. Pendleton. Damien Vance is a fraud. Ethel is a money-laundering scheme built on a deliberately compromised blockchain. I have the proof. Tonight was not a performance. It was a warning. He has now threatened my son. I am a liability to him he cannot afford. I believe I can be an asset to you. Our interests in neutralizing him are aligned. If you are willing to hear me out, flash the headlights of the black Bentley parked by your entrance twice. If you do not, I will be gone in 5 minutes. Elena Petrova, formerly U.S. Treasury, FinCEN. Adding the postscript was the real gamble. It was either proof of her credibility or the ravings of a lunatic. There was no middle ground. She folded the note, took the last clean $20 bill from her wallet, and stepped out into the rain. The doorman was a statue in a perfectly tailored uniform. He watched her approach with an expression of polite disinterest that had been cultivated over decades of dealing with the city's eccentrics. "This is for Mr. Arthur Pendleton," she said, her voice betraying none of the frantic terror that gripped her. She held out the note and the 20. "It is a matter of extreme urgency. Please ensure he receives it directly." The doorman's eyes flickered from the money to her rain-soaked coat, to the fierce, desperate intensity in her gaze. He saw something beyond a simple plea. He saw a chess move being made on his doorstep. He gave a curt, almost imperceptible nod, took the note, and vanished into the lobby's warm glow. Returning to her car was the longest walk of her life. Each step was a lifetime. She slid back into the driver's seat, her clothes dripping onto the worn fabric. She stared at the Bentley, its black paint gleaming under the streetlights. She began to count. 10 seconds. 20. A full minute passed. The silence from the building was an answer in itself. Of course. Why would he believe her? She was a waitress, a loose cannon who had caused a scene. He was probably upstairs with his security, laughing at her audacity. 2 minutes. Despair, cold and bitter, began to seep into her bones. She had been a fool. She reached for the gear shift, ready to flee, to find some anonymous corner of the world and wait for the end. And then it happened. The Bentley's headlights cut through the rain, a single, brilliant flash. Then a second. A breath she hadn't realized she was holding escaped her in a ragged gasp. It was the most beautiful sight she had ever seen. A man in a driver's uniform emerged from the building and walked towards her, holding a large black umbrella. He tapped gently on her window. "Miss Petrova?" he asked, his voice low and professional. "Mr. Pendleton will see you. Please leave the car. We will have it secured." She nodded, unable to speak. She grabbed the briefcase, its weight now feeling less like an anchor and more like a shield. The driver led her into the building, the heavy brass doors closing behind them with a soft, final thud. The sound of the storm, the city, and her old life were sealed away. The private elevator was a silent, wood-paneled box that ascended without a sound. It opened not into a hallway, but directly into a vast living space. It was a room that whispered wealth, not shouted it. Floor-to-ceiling windows revealed a panoramic view of Central Park, a dark, sprawling lung in the glittering ribcage of the city. The air smelled of old leather, books, and faint, expensive pipe tobacco. Arthur Pendleton stood by the window, holding a crystal tumbler of amber liquid. He had changed into a heavy silk robe the color of burgundy. He turned, and his eyes, pale and intelligent, fixed on her. They held no surprise, only a calm, unnerving assessment. "Ms. Petrova," he said, his voice the same dry, even tone she remembered from the restaurant. "Or should I say, Agent Petrova? Though I believe your official status is deceased." Elena froze, her hand tightening on the briefcase handle. "How? When a waitress not only speaks flawless classical Arabic, but also understands the specific, technical vulnerabilities of a fraudulent blockchain, one begins to suspect she is not, in fact, a waitress," Pendleton said, taking a small sip of his scotch. "It took my people 7 minutes to cross-reference your name with a list of federal agents who have disappeared under unusual circumstances. Your file at the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network was heavily redacted, but the markers were all there. The focus on cryptocurrency, the deep cover assignments in the Middle East, the timeline of your disappearance, it fit. The question is, what is a ghost doing working at Ethelgard?" "Surviving," Elena said, her voice raw. "Hiding. Keeping my son safe." "Your son, Leo," Pendleton stated, not as a question. 6 years old. Severe asthmatic condition. The reason for the $480,000 medical bill that I imagine prompted tonight's fireworks." She stared at him, a new kind of fear dawning. Vance's knowledge was a cudgel. Pendleton's was a scalpel. "You've been investigating me since I left the restaurant." "I have been investigating everything," he corrected gently. "I do not appreciate circuses in my preferred dining establishments, especially when they involve men like Damien Vance. He is a parasite on the system I have spent my life helping to build. A creature of chaos. I have been waiting for the right tool to remove him. And then tonight, the tool walked up to his table and offered him a glass of water." He gestured to a deep leather armchair. "Sit down, Ms. Petrova. Put the case on the floor. You are safe here. For now." She did as he said, sinking into the chair. The sheer relief of being in a secure room, of speaking to someone who understood the stakes, was overwhelming. "He knows about Leo," she whispered. "He texted me." "I know," Pendleton said. "We intercepted the message. His digital footprint is as sloppy as his business ethics. While you were driving here, my team was already in motion. A car is en route to your apartment. It is a quiet team. They will extract your son and his sitter and take them to a secure location outside the city. Vance's thugs will arrive to find an empty apartment. They will not get to him. I give you my word." Tears welled in Eleanor's eyes, hot and sudden. Tears of a terror she hadn't allowed herself to feel, and a gratitude so profound it was painful. "Why? Why would you do all this for me?" Pendleton sat in the chair opposite her, setting his drink down on a coaster. "Do not mistake my actions for altruism. This is an investment. I am investing in the stability of my world, and you are the instrument I have chosen to achieve it. Vance and his ilk believe they have created a new paradigm, a world without rules, without history. They are wrong. They have simply created a new, more efficient form of theft. It is a cancer, and it must be cut out. He leaned forward, his eyes locking onto hers. So, tell me. Tell me everything you know. Every back door, every shell company, every dirty wallet address. Give me the ammunition, and I will provide the cannon. For the next hour, Elena talked. The years of suppressed knowledge, of silent analysis, came pouring out. She mapped Vance's entire empire for him on a tablet he provided, her fingers flying across the screen, drawing connections, highlighting vulnerabilities. It was a symphony of fraud, and she knew every note. She showed him the Cayman Holding Company, the wash trading on unregulated exchanges to inflate Athel's value, the single validator node, address 0xB7, that Vance personally controlled to push through fraudulent transactions. Pendleton listened, his expression unchanging, but she could see a flicker of deep appreciation in his eyes. He was a master of his own world, and he recognized mastery in another. When she was finished, he stood and walked back to the window. It is worse than I thought. More audacious. He is not just stealing money. He is attempting to destabilize the entire digital asset market for his own gain. His phone chimed softly. He looked at it, then back at Elena. Your son is secure. He and Mrs. Gable are on their way to my estate in Greenwich. They are safe. Elena closed her eyes, bowing her head as the weight of 2 years of constant, gnawing fear finally lifted from her shoulders. Thank you, she breathed. Now, Pendleton said, his voice shifting, becoming harder, more focused. We strike back. Not tomorrow. Not next week. Now. While he believes you are a terrified woman on the run, he is hunting a ghost, which gives us the element of surprise. What is his greatest vulnerability? Elena's mind was already there. His ego, she said without hesitation, and his reliance on the illusion of decentralization. He has to maintain the public fiction that Ethel is a secure, trustless network. We can use that. She looked at the briefcase on the floor. And we can use his money to do it. A slow smile spread across Pendleton's face. I was hoping you'd say that. Tell me what you need. I need a clean laptop, a military-grade VPN, and access to a crypto exchange that doesn't require immediate KYC verification. And I need to open a new bank account, a very specific kind. For the next 20 minutes, Elena was no longer a waitress or a fugitive. She was the weapon she had been trained to be. With Pendleton's resources, she moved with blinding speed. A new, heavily encrypted laptop was brought to the room. She directed one of Pendleton's aides to take $10,000 from the briefcase and deposit it via a proxy into a newly created bank account under a shell corporation Pendleton owned. Then she went to work. She converted the $10,000 to Ethereum, then used a series of decentralized mixing services to obscure its origin. A digital laundry cycle she could perform in her sleep. The final clean crypto was sent to a new, anonymous wallet. Vance's back pocket validator, 0xB7, is programmed to automatically approve any transaction under a certain value from a new wallet to build a false history of network activity, she explained, her fingers a blur on the keyboard. He uses it to create the illusion of a busy, healthy network. He thinks it's a feature. It's actually a fatal flaw. She initiated a transaction, not for millions, not for thousands, for a tiny, insignificant amount, 0.731101 ether. The number was a message. Block 732911. I'm sending this pittance to a wallet I know is one of his primary slush funds, she murmured. the transaction is meaningless. But the metadata is everything. Using a technique she had pioneered at FinCEN, she embedded a tiny encrypted data packet into the transaction's memo field. It was invisible to a casual observer, but to any financial watchdog algorithm scanning the blockchain, it was a flare in the darkness. The packet contained the wallet addresses of all of Vance's known shell companies and a single line of text: Ethel Prime Holdings LLC, Cayman Islands, unauthorized internal transfer. His own system will now approve the transaction, she said, her eyes gleaming in the laptop's glow. It will be permanently recorded on his own blockchain. He is about to notarize his own confession. She hit enter. The transaction was confirmed in less than a second, validated as she predicted by 0xB7. It's done, she said. By the time the markets open in Zurich, the Swiss Financial Market Supervisory Authority will have an automated alert. By the time they open in New York, the SEC will have one. They won't know what it means at first, but they will see the connection between a public company and a string of illicit offshore wallets. They will freeze his assets pending investigation. He's finished. Pendleton stared at the screen, then at her. He let out a low whistle of pure admiration. You haven't just built a better mousetrap, Ms. Petrova. You've convinced the mouse to hang himself with his own tail. Magnificent. A profound silence filled the room, broken only by the distant, fading rumble of the storm. The war was over before it had even begun. Not with a bang, but with a single, silent, surgically precise keystroke. Elena leaned back in the chair, the tension draining from her body, leaving an exhaustion so deep it felt geological. She had done it. She had faced the Leviathan and, with the right tools, had severed its spine. Michael will take you to Greenwich now, Pendleton said softly. Go see your son. He walked to his desk and took out a simple, elegant key card. This is for the guest house on the estate. Stay as long as you need. We can discuss your future employment with Pendleton Industries once you have had a chance to breathe. She stood up, her legs unsteady. The briefcase is no longer your concern, he finished. It is evidence. Consider the $500,000 a signing bonus, the first deposit of which you have already used to such spectacular effect. The rest will be waiting for you in a proper account. She could only nod, the words of gratitude catching in her throat. The ride to Connecticut was a blur of rain-slicked highways and dark, winding country roads. But as the Bentley passed through a set of imposing iron gates and pulled up to a beautifully appointed stone guest house, the world came back into focus. The door opened before she reached it. A kind-faced, silver-haired woman stood there. Mrs. Gable. Elena! Oh, thank God! The older woman cried, pulling her into a hug. These nice men showed up. They were so polite. They said you'd sent them. Leo's asleep inside. He was so brave. Eleanor walked past her, her heart a frantic drum. And there, on a plush sofa, curled under a cashmere blanket, was Leo. His face was peaceful in sleep, his chest rising and falling in a slow, easy rhythm, free of the wheezing that haunted her nights. She knelt beside him, her hand hovering over his hair, almost afraid to touch him, as if he were a dream that might vanish. She thought of the woman who had walked into Ethelgard that evening, stooped with exhaustion and despair. She thought of the analyst she had once been, a hunter in a digital wilderness. Tonight, the two had merged. She was no longer a ghost hiding from her past, or a warrior fighting a distant war. She was a mother, and she had brought the full, terrifying weight of her past to bear, to protect her son's future. She gently brushed a stray curl from his forehead. Leo stirred, his eyes fluttering open. They focused on her face, and a slow, sleepy smile spread across his lips. "Mummy," he murmured, his voice thick with sleep. "You're here." "I'm here, baby," she whispered, the tears finally falling, hot and cleansing. "I'm right here, and I'm never leaving again." She gathered him into her arms, burying her face in his warm hair, breathing in the simple, perfect scent of her child. The storm outside had passed. The city and its monsters felt a world away. Here, in the quiet safety of the night, holding her son, Elena Petrova was finally, truly home.